Good morning, everybody. It's your favorite aspiring revolutionary here, a wandering author, reminding you that we are all the authors of our own lives. As always, my message remains the same: spend less, live more, earn your freedom with reality. And today we are turning our attention to question number 3 from the Summa Theologica, which is on the simplicity of God. And in this regard, St. Thomas is talking about whether God is a composite being or whether he is a simple being, meaning, is he all one thing or is he made up of multiple things? And, ascertaining whether something exists, whether God exists, is one matter, but then defining the manner of his existence is another matter altogether. God has been said to be immutable, transcendent, immanent, and any other of a number of adjectives over the years, but what do these adjectives mean? St. Thomas's approach seeks to answer 3 considerations of God's simplicity. When it comes to God, matters are further complicated by the fact that we cannot know his essence, or what the scholastics call his quiddity, or his whatness. Taking this into account, Aquinas replies in 8 articles to answer how he is not, how he is known by us, and then how he is named. This whole analysis is similar to negatives in photography, a process of deduction by elimination. So discussing God's simplicity necessarily entails a discussion of his perfection, this infinity, his immutability, and his unity. This will be done through 8 points. So, in the first article, we ask whether God is a body. Pretty much everything that we interact with in our day-to-day lives abides by universal natural laws: time, gravity, thermodynamics. Typically, people only enter states that transcend these natural boundaries when asleep or during periods of ecstatic union. It would be normal to assume that God is also bound by these constraints and exists in 3-dimensional space, right? Without reservation, God may appear to possess a body. After all, he did create all 3 spatial dimensions to begin with. In the first chapter of Genesis, it was written, "Let us make man to our image and likeness." If we were made in his image, would the implication not be that he also possessed a similar form or body to us? And if we dig deeper into Scripture, one may even find references suggesting that God has a physical or corporeal body like us. For example, in Job 40, verse 4, "Hast thou an arm like God?" Or in Psalms 33:16, it adds, "The eyes of the Lord are upon the just," suggesting that God has eyes like we do. Should we ignore these phrases, hand-wave them away as mere allegory, or do they indicate a greater commonality between us and the Father? Now, the most vocal critics might even cite the book of Isaiah, where it was said in chapter 6, verse 1, "I saw the Lord sitting," and in chapter 3:13, "He standeth up to judge." Now, always quick to relate postures with positions, these verses could be used as a demonstration of the Lord's corporeal form. Spoken to us through ancient pages, the Psalms do more than recount songs of praise and worship. In chapter 33, verse 6, the Psalms tell us, "Come ye to him and be enlightened," indicating a direction for us to travel and distance to be crossed. For us to traverse these gaps and connect with him, would God not need to have a location? How else could we reach him if he didn't have a physical space to occupy? Likewise, when the book of Jeremiah in chapter 17, verse 13 cautions us that all they that depart from thee shall be written in the earth, that's another verse that indicates some sort of spatial position for the Lord. To depart from him, do we not need God to have a location, and therefore a bounded body? Or are we taking things too literally whenever we analyze these phrases? All these perfectly reasonable objections make it easy to see why so many of us conjure the image of a man sitting in the clouds when we think of God. However, St. Thomas sounds the alarm and pulls a quote from the 4th chapter of St. John's Gospel, in John chapter 4, verse 24, where he says, "God is a spirit." St. Thomas then proceeds to demonstrate God's lack of a body in 3 ways. First is through the use of what's called induction. Like we said, induction is whenever we use general facts to pull out an overarching principle, or we use specific facts to pull out an overarching principle. First, induction lets us know that bodies never move unless acted upon. And as we previously proved, God was the unmoved mover, or the uncaused cause, so he must not have a body, therefore. Following from the first mover principle, we can say that the first being must exist in actuality, and not as mere potential. A typical physicist would agree that most things must exist as a potential before becoming anything actual. However, when we extrapolate back far enough, an impasse arises. Something must have caused all of the other causes, right? Things only exist as potentials because an actual thing acted upon it. Actuality precedes potentiality from this perspective. Precedes, not proceeds. As the universe's first being, God should not have any potentiality. Yet all bodies as continuous objects possess some potentiality, since the continuous is divisible into infinity. And third, Aquinas' third argument hinges upon God's nobility. This line of thinking goes that as the most noble being, God should not have a body. All bodies fall into one of two categories, animate or inanimate. And Aristotle told us how animate objects are nobler than inanimate ones, and it is obvious from our observations of the world that not all bodies are animated. There's a plenty of inanimate things, just like this table right here, for example. It is not living. Thus, an object's animation rests on an additional principle, such as the soul for the human body. St. Thomas concludes by remarking on how whatever is responsible for animating bodies must be nobler than the bodies themselves. When we examine the nature of corporeal objects and put God into the context of our three-dimensional world, an interesting picture emerges. Dionysius likens his depth to the incomprehensibility of his essence, length to his all-pervading power, and breadth to his overspreading of all things. St. Thomas elaborates that man was made in God's image, but not as relates to his body. Rather, we were made in his likeness, using what is superior to common animals, that is, reason and intelligence. A straightforward rebuttal is given to dismiss the points in Scripture, where God is given bodily qualities, such as eyes or hands. These are mere metaphors meant to represent the intellectual actions of God, turning these scriptural phrases into symbolism only. Likewise, the same argument is used to dismiss the parts of the Bible when God is spoken of as sitting or having some other form of posture. An image of him sitting represents his timeless and stable nature, while one of him standing evokes a sense of omniscience. On a different note, when Holy Text speaks of us as moving closer or nearer or further from God, it speaks not of a physical direction. Movement toward and away from God is accomplished via the actions of the soul, as he is omnipresent, omnipotent, and everywhere. Question 3, Article 2, asks whether God is composed of matter and form. So, if we settle the matter and assume God does not have a body, that leaves one question hanging open. Does God have matter and form, or is he entirely immaterial? In Hebrews chapter 10, verse 38, it mentions, "But my just man liveth by faith, but if he withdraw himself, he shall not please my soul." All things with a soul are supposed to be material in nature, so what does this say of God? Aquinas shows how his opponents point to places throughout Scripture, such as in Psalms chapter 105, verse 40, that God has emotions, such as anger and joy. Emotions normally only belong to things with corporeal forms, thus God must also be material, at least according to his opponents. Finally, Holy Text refers to God as one singular and an individual, not many. Such individuation is said to be characteristic of what possesses matter and form. Now, in his preceding article, St. Aquinas gave us proof that God did not have a corporeal body, and it follows from this logic that he also does not have matter or form. Matter and form are properties of dimensive bodies, meaning bodies that have dimensions. Literally, those bodies which have dimensions. So if God does not have a body, he would not have these either. And if matter cannot exist in God, for as we have demonstrated in the previous article, God is pure action. He is the act of to be, the great I am, as stated by Bishop Robert Barron. The concept of to be, absolutely no potentiality. Matter has potential and thus cannot be found in him. Everything made of matter owes its excellence, or arete, as the Greeks would have said, to its form, a Platonic concept in nature. As such, one's goodness or virtue is derived from the relative attainment of these ideals. In other words, they are participatory. God, as the first good and best of all goods, does not participate in goodness. He is the embodiment of it. This further implies that God has a pureness of essence that is similar to the Platonic ideals, something unbefitting of matter and form. Now, defining whether God existed was a tough nut to crack, but asking whether he is identical to his essence or his nature is another matter altogether as well. So that leads us to Article 3 of the third question. So remember, Plato taught us that ideals live in the world of forms, which is outside of typical reality. Thus, objects and their essences are separate. So like this table, it's a very common example in the Platonic forms. An instantiation or a specific table is different than the idea of a table, or at least usually. God may be the exception in this case, because it has been said that nothing can be itself. In other words, an object's essence cannot coexist with its object. The idea of you and you are mutually exclusive. End of story. However, the substance of God, the so-called Godhead, is said to be in God. Critics may attempt to dispute this and claim that God is not the same as the Godhead because the nature of creation denies what's called the suppositum, which is identical with its nature. For example, man and his humanity are not one and the same. Likewise, God and the Godhead are separate or separated. However, on the contrary, Aquinas refutes these claims, and his refutation begins with a quote from the Gospel of John, chapter 14, verse 6, where he says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Images like this clarify the vision Aquinas paints of God as more than just life itself, but also as a living being. Thus, the relationship between God and the Godhead is analogous to the one between life and the living. So in St. Thomas's conception, God is identical with his essence. So we can contrast this with what is made of matter and form, and a clear difference emerges. With man, for example, the individual is but one instantiation of our humanity, our collective essence. Humanity differs from a single human in that its definition encompasses all that defines our species. It encompasses every single human. However, a person's unique individual traits, like their hair color, vocal tonality, or height, are excluded from this broader term. What makes us individuals separates us from our collective humanity. Yet we do include them in the individual, so an individual man is more than just his humanity. And for humans, we are not identical with our essence or our humanity, nor are other species of matter and form. A table is not equivalent to its tableness, and neither is a horse equivalent to its horseness. Comparing this to God is trivial, as he lacks matter and form. Without these, nothing can be individualized. Thus, God and his essence are one and the same. Now, the fourth article of question 3 asks whether essence and existence are the same in God. An object's essence contains its nature, and its existence contains its essence, usually. However, some opponents like to point out that nothing would be added to the divine being if this were true of God. Their line of thinking supposes any being to which no addition is made must be universal and predicate of all things. From this viewpoint, God could be thought of as being in general, but Aquinas forces us to recognize the error with a quote from the Book of Wisdom. In chapter 14, verse 21, where it says, "For man gave the incommunicable name to stones and wood." Another branch of thinking says, we may know if God exists, but may not know what he is. However, Hilary of Poitiers said in book 7 of his book on the Trinity, in God, existence is not an accidental quality, as defined of by Aristotle, which is a quality that can change without altering the nature of a substance. However, it is subsisting truth. Thus, what subsists in God is his existence. And Aquinas further expounds upon this by saying that God is both his own essence and existence. He tells us that anything an object has apart from its essence must be caused either by the constituents of the essence or by an exterior agent. The constituent principle of something is only a part of the whole, like language to man. It is uniquely human to speak and converse, but this still only represents a fraction of our essence as humans. A fraction of our essence as humans. Exterior agents are exactly how they sound. For example, if you freeze a tray of ice, the freezer removed the heat and lowered the temperature. However, when one talks of constituent principles, we must remember these may never be a sufficient cause for something's existence. So, the freezer did not cause the ice to exist. It merely transformed the water from one phase of existence to another. Our ability to speak is not what brought us into the world. God is. If an object has a caused existence, meaning it was brought forth into the world, something else must have caused it. However, this cannot be true of God by definition. Therefore, he is the first efficient cause. Second, when we compare existence to essence, we must think in terms of what is potentially and what is actually. Using this lens, existence is a distinct reality, while essence is mere potentiality. Now, as we discussed previously, there is no potential in God. He is the great I Am. He is pure action. So there cannot be a difference between the two concepts in him. Third, St. Thomas further elaborates this idea with an analogy of a burning object. Although it is not fire, the burning object participates in the fire's existence, which makes it a participated being. And since we have shown God's essence and existence are identical, he cannot be a participated being. Thus, the most grievous and bitter thing in the state of public affairs for the masses was their slavery. Not but what they were discontented also about everything else, for they found themselves virtually without a share in anything. That was a quote from, I don't think that's Aristotle quote. That's just a quote from my journal. So the next time that we talk, we will continue our discussion of question 3 by moving on to Article 5. Anyways, this is a wandering author here, reminding you that we are all the authors of our own lives. As always, my message remains the same: spend less, live more, earn your freedom with frugality. And what are you guys doing in order to inspire, uplift, and empower your local community today? Because this world isn't changing unless we all do our part, and you can count on me to do mine daily. Until next time, God bless.